Zara Johnson gripped her passport tightly as she walked down the narrow airplane aisle. The blue booklet was still crisp and new. She'd gotten it just 3 weeks ago for this trip. At 19, she'd never traveled outside the country before, and the thought of representing her university at the Global Youth Summit in Geneva made her heart race with excitement. The flight was packed. Passengers struggled with oversized carry-ons, bumping into seat backs as they tried to find space in the overhead bins. Zara's small rolling suitcase felt heavier with each step. She'd packed carefully, her presentation notes, a few nice outfits for the conference, and the special journal her parents had given her to document this milestone. "Excuse me," Zara said politely to a flight attendant standing near row 23. "Could you help me lift my bag? I can't quite reach." The flight attendant, whose name tag read Patricia Winters, turned with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was in her mid-40s with blonde hair pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her skin. "You'll need to find space somewhere else," Patricia said without looking up from her clipboard. "These bins are full." Zara glanced up. The bin was actually half empty. "I think there's room right there," she said, pointing. Patricia sighed loudly. "Fine." She grabbed Zara's suitcase roughly, shoving it into the compartment without care. "Boarding pass and passport," she demanded suddenly. Zara blinked in confusion. "You already checked them at the door." "Passport and boarding pass," Patricia repeated, louder this time. Several nearby passengers looked up from their books and phones. Hands slightly trembling, Zara pulled out her documents again. She'd been so careful with everything, triple-checking her visa application, arriving 3 hours early, following every rule. Patricia snatched the items and began inspecting them with exaggerated scrutiny, flipping through each page of the passport. "Where are you going?" she asked, even though the destination was clearly printed on the boarding pass in her hand. "Geneva," Zara answered, her voice steady despite her rising discomfort. "For a student conference." An older man across the aisle lowered his newspaper. A woman 2 rows ahead turned around. The tension was noticeable now. "This is a new passport," Patricia stated flatly, as if it were an accusation. "Yes, I got it for this trip. It's my first time traveling internationally." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "It looks too new." A chill ran down Zara's spine. Was this really happening? She'd heard stories from friends, seen social media posts about situations like this, but had hoped, perhaps naively, that she wouldn't experience it herself. "It's new because I just got it," Zara explained, her voice still calm though her heart hammered in her chest. She was aware of the growing audience, aware of her skin color, aware of everything her parents had warned her about. Another flight attendant, a younger man with kind eyes, approached. "Everything okay here, Patricia?" "I need to verify this passport," Patricia announced. "It doesn't look right to me." "What exactly doesn't look right?" Zara asked. She could feel heat rising in her cheeks, but remembered her mother's words. "Never let them see your anger. It only plays into their hands." A passenger across the aisle, a woman with silver-streaked hair and elegant glasses, spoke up. "I don't understand why you're questioning her when you didn't question me or anyone else in this section." Patricia's face flushed. "This is a security matter. I need to take this to the captain." Before anyone could object, she walked briskly toward the front of the plane with Zara's passport and boarding pass. The male flight attendant gave Zara an apologetic look. "Please take your seat. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." But as Zara sat down, she could feel eyes on her, some sympathetic, others curious, a few deliberately looking away. She pulled out her phone and texted her mom, "Something's happening on the plane. Not sure what yet. Will call you when I can." Little did she know that in the next few minutes, her entire trip and life would take a dramatic turn that would soon have the whole world watching. 10 minutes passed, and Zara sat stiffly in her seat, trying to ignore the whispers around her. Her phone buzzed with a reply from her mom. "Stay calm. Document everything." Good advice, but hard to follow when her passport was missing, and the plane was supposed to take off in 20 minutes. Patricia marched back down the aisle, Zara's passport in one hand, a walkie-talkie in the other. Her face wore an expression of triumph that made Zara's stomach twist. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me," Patricia announced loudly. The entire row went quiet. Zara took a deep breath. "Why?" Is there a problem with my passport? The captain needs to speak with you, Patricia said, avoiding the question. She stood with her arms crossed, clearly expecting immediate obedience. Zara didn't move. Can you please tell me what's wrong with my passport? Patricia's nostrils flared. There are irregularities that need to be addressed. What irregularities? Zara asked. She kept her voice steady, though her hands were shaking under the tray table. My passport is brand new. I got it from the official passport office. The man sitting next to Zara, a middle-aged guy in a business suit who had been pretending to sleep, suddenly opened his eyes. I don't see why she needs to leave her seat if you can explain the problem right here, he said. Patricia's face hardened. This is an official airline matter. By now, at least 3 passengers had their phones out, recording discreetly. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted from the usual pre-flight restlessness to something more tense, more alert. The younger flight attendant from earlier approached again. His name tag read David. Patricia, maybe I can help sort this out, he offered, his voice low. Patricia turned on him. I've already spoken to the captain. This passenger's documentation is suspicious. Zara felt her face grow hot. There's nothing suspicious about my passport. It's real, it's valid, and I have every right to be on this flight. A woman across the aisle spoke up. I'm an immigration attorney. Perhaps I can take a look. She was in her 60s with grey curly hair, wearing a colorful scarf. That won't be necessary, Patricia snapped. She held Zara's passport higher, as if it were evidence in a trial. The captain has concerns about the authenticity of this document. David looked uncomfortable. Patricia, I don't think the captain actually. I spoke to him myself. Patricia's voice rose sharply. Several more phones came out, recording more openly now. A flight attendant from first class came back to investigate the commotion. She had dark hair with streaks of silver and a name tag that read Grace. What's happening here? Grace asked, her eyes darting between Patricia and the growing number of recording devices. Patricia lowered her voice, but in the tense silence, everyone could still hear. This passenger's passport doesn't look legitimate. Too new, no stamps, and the photo. She trailed off, seemingly unable to find an actual flaw. Let me see, Grace said, reaching for the passport. But Patricia stepped back. The captain agreed we need to verify it. Then let's call him here, Zara suggested. She reached for her phone. My parents are diplomats. I can have them on the line in 2 minutes to confirm my identity. This wasn't true, but Zara hoped it might make Patricia think twice. Patricia's expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time. More passengers were watching now, and someone near the front called out, "What's the holdup? We're going to be late." I need to take this to security, Patricia declared, clutching the passport tighter. An older man in first class, dressed in an expensive suit, stood up. Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. I fly this route twice a month, and I've never seen a passenger treated this way. May I ask why this young woman is being singled out? The question hung in the air. Everyone knew why. No one wanted to say it. David and Grace exchanged glances. The plane had become unnaturally quiet, just the hum of the ventilation system and the occasional click of a phone camera. Patricia's face reddened. She was trapped now, with too many witnesses, too many cameras, and not enough justification for her actions. But instead of backing down, she gripped the passport even tighter, her knuckles turning white. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Patricia stood in the aisle, still clutching Zara's passport, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. More than a dozen passengers were now openly recording the confrontation on their phones. I'm going to ask one more time, Zara said, her voice remarkably steady. Please return my passport and explain exactly what you think is wrong with it. Patricia's jaw tightened. I don't have to explain myself to you. The captain has concerns about. I haven't spoken to the captain about any passport, came a new voice. A tall man in a pilot's uniform had appeared at the front of the cabin. His grey hair and calm demeanor commanded immediate attention. What's going on here? The plane went completely silent. Patricia froze, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Captain Chen, Grace said, stepping forward. There seems to be a misunderstanding about this passenger's documentation. Captain Chen walked down the aisle until he reached them. And what exactly is the misunderstanding? Patricia straightened her uniform with her free hand. Sir, I noticed some irregularities with this passport. It looks too new, and I was concerned about potential fraud. The captain extended his hand. May I see it? Patricia hesitated, then handed over Zara's passport. The captain opened it, flipped through a few pages, and looked at Zara. Miss Johnson, he confirmed, reading from the passport. Zara nodded. This appears to be a perfectly valid U.S. passport, he said, newly issued but completely legitimate. Patricia's face darkened. But sir, don't you think it's suspicious that— No, I don't, Captain Chen cut her off firmly. He turned to Zara. I apologize for this inconvenience, Miss Johnson. He handed the passport back to Zara, not to Patricia. A wave of relief washed over Zara as her fingers closed around the passport. She'd been afraid she might never see it again. But Patricia wasn't finished. As if something inside her had snapped, she lunged forward and snatched the passport from Zara's hand. This can't be right, Patricia shouted. You're not looking closely enough. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Captain Chen's expression hardened. Flight Attendant Winters, return that passport immediately. That's an order. Instead of complying, Patricia's fingers tightened around the blue booklet. Her eyes were wild now, darting between Zara and the growing crowd of onlookers. No, she said, something's not right here. I know it. And then, in a moment that would soon be viewed millions of times across the internet, Patricia Winters did the unthinkable. With trembling hands, she gripped the passport on both sides and tore it straight down the middle. The sound of ripping paper seemed unnaturally loud in the shocked silence that followed. There, Patricia said, her voice shrill. Now security will have to investigate. For a moment, no one moved. Zara stared at the torn pieces of her passport, her ticket to the conference, her months of preparation, her parents' proud smiles when she'd received her acceptance letter, all potentially ruined in an instant of inexplicable rage. Oh my God, someone whispered. Captain Chen's face had gone pale. Patricia, do you realize what you've just done? Patricia dropped the torn pieces of passport onto Zara's tray table. I was just doing my job, she said, but her voice had lost its confidence. You just destroyed a federal document, the immigration attorney said, standing up. That's a federal offense. And it was caught on at least 15 cameras, added a young man holding up his phone. Zara picked up the pieces of her passport, hands trembling slightly. She'd been prepared for rudeness, even discrimination, but not this level of destruction. Her mind raced through the implications, the conference she might miss, the hassle of getting a replacement passport, the humiliation of this public spectacle. I want to file a formal complaint, Zara said, her voice breaking slightly for the first time. And I need the names of everyone involved. Captain Chen turned to David. Please escort Ms. Winters to the crew area immediately. Then to Grace. Contact airline operations and security. Tell them we have a serious incident requiring immediate attention. Patricia's face had drained of color as the reality of what she'd done began to sink in. I was just following protocol, she insisted weakly. There is no protocol for destroying a passenger's passport, Captain Chen said coldly. David, please remove her from this cabin now. As David led a shell-shocked Patricia toward the front of the plane, Captain Chen addressed Zara directly. Miss Johnson, on behalf of this airline, I want to express my deepest apologies for what just happened. I assure you that this behavior does not represent our company values. We'll be returning to the gate, and I'll personally ensure that you receive all necessary assistance. Zara nodded, still clutching the torn halves of her passport. The woman with the silver-streaked hair reached across the aisle and gently touched her arm. I'm a lawyer, she said quietly, and I saw everything. Here's my card. If you need a witness statement or any other help, please call me. As word of what had happened spread through the cabin, passengers from other rows leaned into the aisle, offering supportive glances and outraged whispers. The plane began its slow taxi back to the terminal, and Zara's phone lit up with a text from her mother. Are you okay? What's happening? Zara stared at the screen, trying to figure out how to explain what had just occurred. How do you tell your parents that your passport was torn in half because a flight attendant couldn't believe a young black woman was traveling to an international conference? How do you describe the feeling of being humiliated in front of a plane full of strangers? She typed simply, coming back to gate. We'll call soon. There was an incident. The plane bumped gently as it returned to the gate. Zara sat quietly, still holding the torn pieces of her passport. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop with text messages from her parents, but she couldn't find the right words to explain what had happened. A soft tap on her shoulder made her look up. It was Grace, the senior flight attendant. Airport security and airline representatives are waiting at the gate, Grace said kindly. The captain asked that you be allowed to deplane first. Zara nodded, gathering her belongings. As she stood, several passengers reached out to touch her arm or shoulder in silent support. An elderly woman whispered, "Stay strong, honey," as Zara passed her seat. Walking down the jet bridge, Zara felt like she was in a strange dream. Just 2 hours ago, she'd been so excited about her first international trip. Now she was clutching her destroyed passport and walking toward a group of serious-looking people in suits and uniforms. A woman in a crisp navy blazer with the airline's logo stepped forward. "Miss Johnson, I'm Diane Powell, Customer Relations Manager. I can't begin to tell you how sorry we are about what happened." Before Zara could respond, a tall man in a security uniform approached. "I'm Officer Reyes. We need to document what occurred on the aircraft. Several passengers have already shared video footage with us. Can we go somewhere private?" Zara asked, glancing at the curious onlookers gathering near the gate. They led her to a small conference room where Captain Chen was already waiting, along with 2 more airline representatives and another security officer. Patricia was nowhere to be seen. "Where's my suitcase?" Zara asked suddenly, realizing she'd left her carry-on in the overhead bin. "It's being retrieved," Diane assured her. "Now, can you tell us exactly what happened from the beginning?" Zara took a deep breath and recounted the events, how Patricia had singled her out, questioned her documentation, taken her passport, and finally torn it apart. As she spoke, Officer Reyes took notes while the airline representatives exchanged troubled glances. "May I see the passport?" asked a new arrival, a woman in a Department of Homeland Security uniform. Zara carefully placed the torn halves on the table. The DHS officer examined them and looked up with a frown. "This is a valid U.S. passport, recently issued," she confirmed. "Destroying it is a federal offense." Captain Chen leaned forward. "I want to be clear that Patricia Winters acted alone and against all airline protocols. There is absolutely no procedure that would ever justify destroying a passenger's travel documents." The conference room door opened and a young man with a laptop entered. "We've compiled videos from 6 different passengers," he said. "Would you like to see them?" They watched in silence as the footage played, multiple angles of the same disturbing scene. Seeing it from the outside made Zara's chest tighten. The videos captured what she felt but couldn't articulate, the unmistakable bias in Patricia's actions. "Miss Johnson," Diane said when the videos ended, "we want to assure you that Ms. Winters has been removed from duty pending immediate termination proceedings. This type of behavior violates everything our airline stands for." Officer Reyes cleared his throat. "You have the right to press charges for destruction of federal property and potentially for civil rights violations. Would you like to do that?" Zara's phone buzzed again, her mother calling for the 5th time. "Can I have a moment to call my parents?" she asked. Left alone in the conference room, Zara finally answered, "Mom?" "Zara, what's happening?" "Are you all right?" Her mother's worried voice made Zara's eyes fill with tears for the first time. "I'm okay, but..." Her voice cracked as she explained the situation. "We're coming to the airport right now," her father's voice cut in from another phone. "Don't sign anything or agree to anything until we get there." When Zara's parents arrived 30 minutes later, the small conference room suddenly felt even smaller. Her father, a high school principal with a commanding presence, immediately took charge. Her mother, a pediatrician with a gentle but firm manner, wrapped Zara in a tight hug before turning to face the airline representatives. "My daughter was humiliated and discriminated against on your airline," she stated. "We need to understand exactly what you're going to do about it." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of discussions, phone calls, and paperwork. The airline offered immediate compensation, a replacement passport expedited through their connections with the State Department, and rebooked tickets for a flight the following day. But what touched Zara most was when the DHS officer came back with a temporary travel document. "We've contacted the conference organizers," she said. "They're aware of the situation and will have someone meet you at the Geneva airport. This documentation will get you through immigration there without issues." As evening fell, Zara and her parents finally left the airport. News vans were parked outside. Someone had leaked the story, and several reporters called out to them as they walked to their car. "Not today," her father said firmly, guiding them past the cameras. At home, Zara collapsed onto her bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. Her phone was flooded with messages from friends who had somehow already heard what happened. And on social media, the first video clips were starting to circulate, with hashtags like #FlyingWhileBlack and #PassportTears already trending. "Try to get some rest," her mother said, sitting beside her. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Zara nodded, but as she closed her eyes, she wondered how she would face boarding another plane tomorrow. The excitement she'd felt about the conference had been replaced by anxiety and a heavy knot in her stomach. Yet alongside those feelings was something else. A growing determination. What happened to her shouldn't happen to anyone. And maybe, just maybe, the videos capturing that moment would help make sure it didn't. Zara woke up the next morning to her phone buzzing nonstop. Squinting at the screen, she saw dozens of missed calls, hundreds of text messages, and notifications from every social media app she owned. When she opened Twitter, her heart skipped a beat. The hashtag Justice for Zara was trending at number 3 nationwide. "Mom?" she called out, her voice still groggy with sleep. "You need to see this." Her mother rushed in, still wearing her bathrobe, a worried look on her face. "What's wrong?" Zara held up her phone. "I'm trending." The videos from the plane had spread like wildfire overnight. News channels were running the footage on repeat, with commentators analyzing every second of the confrontation. One clip, filmed from just 3 rows behind Zara, had over 2 million views already. It captured the exact moment Patricia tore the passport, along with the collective gasp from the passengers. "Your father's in the living room talking to a lawyer," her mother said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "And the airline CEO's office has called twice this morning." Downstairs, Zara found her father pacing the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear. He gave her a quick side hug while continuing his conversation. "Yes, we understand the offer, but my daughter's reputation and dignity are worth more than some frequent flyer miles and a voucher," he was saying. The doorbell rang. Zara's mother peeked through the curtains and sighed. "There are 3 news vans outside now." Zara's phone rang again, an unknown number. Normally, she would let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. "Hello. Is this Zara Johnson?" asked a woman's voice. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Tanya Wilson from Good Morning America. We'd like to invite you to share your story on tomorrow's show." Before Zara could respond, another call beeped in, CNN this time, and then another from a major newspaper. Her father ended his call and turned to her. "Zara, you don't have to talk to any of these people if you don't want to." Zara nodded, but a part of her felt that staying silent wasn't the right answer either. This wasn't just about her anymore. The comments under the videos showed that thousands of people were sharing similar experiences, times when they'd been questioned, doubted, or harassed while traveling. Her incident had touched a nerve because it was so blatant, so clearly captured on camera. "I think I should say something," she said finally, "but I want to be careful about how." Her mother squeezed her shoulder. "Whatever you decide, we'll support you." By noon, the airline had released an official statement. "We are deeply disturbed by the incident involving one of our passengers and a former employee. The behavior displayed violates our company values and policies. The employee in question has been terminated effective immediately. We are in contact with the passenger and her family to address this situation and make things right." The words "former employee" jumped out at Zara. Patricia had already been fired. A notification popped up on Zara's phone, a private message from a girl she didn't know. "The same flight attendant did something similar to my brother last year, but nobody believed him because there wasn't any video. Thank you for exposing her. Your courage means so much." More messages followed, flooding in from strangers around the country. Some shared their own stories of discrimination, others just offered support. By mid-afternoon, Zara had made a decision. With her parents' help, she crafted a brief statement and posted it to her social media accounts. "Thank you for all the support and concern. What happened yesterday was upsetting and shouldn't happen to anyone, regardless of their race or appearance. I'm working with the airline to address this incident properly. I still plan to attend the Global Youth Summit and will use this experience to further the conversation about equal treatment for all travelers. For now, I'm asking for some privacy as my family, and I work through next steps." Within minutes, her post had thousands of shares. Her phone rang again, the airline's customer relations director. "Miss Johnson, our CEO, would like to speak with you personally. He's deeply troubled by what occurred and wants to offer not just an apology, but a concrete plan moving forward." After a brief conversation with the CEO, who sounded genuinely distressed, Zara received an email detailing the airline's offer: full compensation for the ruined trip, immediate assistance with passport replacement, first-class tickets to Geneva once her documentation was ready, a personal apology from the CEO on company letterhead, and, most surprisingly, an invitation to consult on the airline's new diversity training program. "They're scared of the bad publicity," her father remarked after reading the email. Probably, Zara agreed. But maybe that's how change happens sometimes. And if I can help make sure this doesn't happen to someone else, isn't that worth something? That evening, as Zara packed a fresh suitcase for her rescheduled trip, news broke that Patricia Winters had released a statement through her attorney. She claimed she'd been following security protocols and that the videos didn't show the full context. The statement was immediately contradicted by the airline, which confirmed no such protocols existed. Social media erupted again, with Patricia's name now trending alongside Zara's. The court of public opinion had made its verdict clear. Later, as Zara scrolled through the day's news coverage on her laptop, she came across an interview with one of the passengers from the flight. The elderly woman who had touched her shoulder and whispered words of encouragement. "I've been flying for 60 years, the woman told the reporter, "and I've never seen anything like it." That young lady handled herself with such dignity. She's going to that conference to represent our country, and I'm proud to have her do it. Zara closed her laptop and smiled. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more decisions, more attention. But for now, she allowed herself to feel a small sense of pride. She hadn't asked for any of this, but maybe, just maybe, something good could come from it after all. 3 days later, Zara finally boarded her rescheduled flight to Geneva. This time, she had an emergency passport in a protective case, 2 airline executives escorting her to the gate, and a first-class ticket that she hadn't asked for but the airline had insisted upon. "We'll have a representative meet you when you land," the female executive assured her as they reached the boarding area. "And the conference organizers have been fully briefed on the situation." Zara nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind. She'd done one carefully selected interview with a respected journalist, declined dozens more, and watched as her story continued to unfold in the media even without her participation. Patricia Winters had hired a high-profile attorney and was now claiming workplace stress and unclear training had led to her momentary lapse in judgment. The airline had responded by releasing portions of their training materials, which explicitly stated that employees should never, under any circumstances, take or damage a passenger's travel documents. As Zara settled into her plush first-class seat, she couldn't help thinking about everything that had changed. Her social media followers had jumped from a few hundred friends to over 50,000 strangers. Civil rights organizations had reached out, offering support and legal assistance. Her university president had called personally to commend her poise under pressure. "Can I get you anything before takeoff, Miss Johnson?" the flight attendant asked, her smile just a little too bright, her manner just a little too careful. "Just some water, please," Zara replied. She looked out the window as the plane taxied down the runway. The same airport, the same destination, but nothing else was the same. She wasn't just a college student heading to a conference anymore. She had become a symbol of something larger than herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Remember why you're going. Don't let all this noise distract you from your purpose." Zara smiled. Her mom always knew exactly what to say. Across the Atlantic, Zara was met by airline representatives who whisked her through customs with her emergency documentation. The conference organizers had arranged for a car to take her directly to her hotel, where she finally collapsed into bed, jet-lagged and emotionally drained. The next morning, as she prepared for the conference's opening session, her phone lit up with breaking news alerts. The Department of Transportation had announced a formal investigation into the airline's practices regarding potential racial bias in passenger interactions, and in a surprising twist, 3 former employees had come forward with similar stories about Patricia Winters, claiming they had reported her behavior to management in the past, but no action had been taken. Zara set her phone aside and focused on reviewing her presentation notes. She had come here to talk about increasing diversity in STEM education, not to become the face of airline discrimination. Yet as she entered the conference center, she could feel eyes following her, people whispering as she passed. The conference director, a distinguished professor from Oxford, approached her immediately. "Miss Johnson, we are so pleased you made it despite the unfortunate circumstances," he said, shaking her hand warmly. "If there's anything we can do to make your experience more comfortable, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," Zara replied. "But I'd really just like to participate normally, like any other delegate." He nodded understanding, but Zara knew that wouldn't be possible. Nothing was normal anymore. During the lunch break, Zara found a quiet corner to check her messages. There was an email from the airline CEO informing her that the company's board of directors had called an emergency meeting to discuss revising their training policies. They wanted her input once she returned from Geneva. There was also a message from a producer at a major news network offering her own show focusing on issues of discrimination in everyday life. Zara nearly choked on her water reading that one. And then there was a notification that Patricia Winters had given a tearful interview on a conservative news channel, claiming she was being made a scapegoat for broader issues, and that she had always treated all passengers equally. Zara closed her email and took a deep breath. Everything was happening so fast. Part of her wanted to jump in, to use this unexpected platform to push for real change. Another part just wanted to go back to being an ordinary college student whose biggest worry was passing organic chemistry. "Excuse me, are you Zara Johnson?" A young woman about her age had approached her table. Zara nodded cautiously. "I'm Lynn from Singapore," the young woman said. "I just wanted to say that what happened to you happened to my cousin last year on a different airline." No one believed her because there wasn't any video. Watching you stand up for yourself gave her the courage to file a formal complaint. So, thank you. Before Zara could respond, Lynn had walked away, disappearing into the crowd of international students. That brief interaction stayed with Zara throughout the afternoon sessions. By the time she returned to her hotel room that evening, she had made a decision. She couldn't control how others used her story, but she could choose how she would use the unexpected spotlight herself. She opened her laptop and began typing a careful email to the airline CEO. She would accept their invitation to consult on new training programs, but she had conditions. The process must be transparent, the changes must be meaningful, and the airline must commit to addressing systemic issues, not just individual bad actors. As she pressed send, her phone rang, her father calling to check in. "How was the first day?" he asked. "Different than I expected," Zara admitted. "But I think I'm where I'm supposed to be." "That's my girl," he said proudly. "Just remember, all these people suddenly interested in what you have to say. They didn't make you special. You already were." 6 months later, Zara stood in front of a packed auditorium at the airline's headquarters. Rows of flight attendants, pilots, gate agents, and executives filled every seat, their eyes fixed on the young woman who had become an unexpected catalyst for change. "Good morning," Zara began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Some of you might recognize me from social media or news stories, but I'd like you to know me as more than just that girl whose passport was ripped up." A nervous chuckle rippled through the room. In the 6 months since the incident, so much had changed, both for Zara and for the airline industry as a whole. The Department of Transportation's investigation had expanded to include 3 major airlines, uncovering patterns of passenger profiling that had gone unaddressed for years. The findings had prompted new federal guidelines for airlines, with concrete penalties for non-compliance. Patricia Winters had eventually issued a genuine public apology after her initial defensive statements backfired badly. She had lost her job and, according to news reports, was now working at a small travel agency while attending mandatory buyer's training courses. As for Zara, she had returned from Geneva with a newfound sense of purpose. Her presentation at the Youth Summit had received a standing ovation, not just for its content, but for the strength of character she had demonstrated in even making it there. The easy thing would have been to accept the airline's initial offer, cash the check, and try to move on with my life, Zara continued, flipping to the next slide in her presentation. But that wouldn't have addressed the real problem. And the real problem wasn't just one flight attendant on one bad day. In the front row, the airline's CEO nodded solemnly. He had personally championed the comprehensive training program Zara was now helping to launch. It hadn't been easy convincing the board to invest millions in such sweeping changes, but the viral videos and the subsequent drop in stock prices had made a compelling argument. What happened to me happens to people every day, in ways both big and small, Zara said. The difference was that mine was caught on camera. She clicked to a slide showing statistics on passenger complaints related to discriminatory treatment, numbers that had been quietly buried before the incident but were now part of the airline's quarterly public reporting. Today isn't about blame or shame, Zara assured them. It's about recognition and growth. About creating an environment where everyone, both passengers and employees, feels respected and valued. After her presentation, a line of airline staff waited to speak with her. An older flight attendant with gray hair pulled Zara aside. "I've been flying for 32 years, she said quietly, "and I've seen things like what happened to you more times than I can count. I always wanted to speak up, but I was afraid for my job. Thank you for giving people like me the courage to finally say something." That evening, Zara had dinner with her parents at their favorite local restaurant. Between bites of her mom's birthday cake, Zara had just turned 20, she shared stories from the day. "The training program is being adopted by 2 other airlines now," she said excitedly. "And they're looking at expanding it to airport security personnel as well." Her father beamed with pride. "When I think about how this all started..." "I know," Zara nodded. "Sometimes I still can't believe it myself." Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I can believe it. You've always been special, Zara. This situation just gave other people the chance to see it too." Later that night, as Zara scrolled through her email, she found a message from the dean of her university. The subject line read simply, "A proposition." The email explained that the school wanted to create a new scholarship program focused on social justice leadership, and they wanted to name it after her. They were asking for her input on the selection criteria and her participation on the committee. Zara leaned back in her chair, thinking about how much her life had changed in half a year. She had started the semester as just another pre-med student, worried about grades and social life like everyone else. Now she was consulting for airlines, speaking at conferences, and apparently getting scholarships named after her. Her phone chimed with a news alert. A major airline, not the one involved in her incident, had just announced a new passenger Bill of Rights with explicit protections against discriminatory treatment. The announcement credited the watershed moment 6 months ago that had forced the industry to confront long-standing issues. Zara smiled to herself. When she had first posted her statement about using her experience to further the conversation, she hadn't fully understood what that might mean. She certainly hadn't expected to help reshape policies affecting millions of travelers. As she drafted her response to the dean, Zara thought about what she might say to her younger self, the nervous girl clutching a new passport and dreaming of her first international trip. She would tell her that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be moments of humiliation and anger and doubt, but also moments of incredible growth and unexpected opportunity. Most importantly, she would tell her not to be afraid to stand up for herself, even when it seemed easier to stay quiet. Because sometimes what starts as one person's stand becomes the catalyst for change that many have been waiting for. Zara glanced at her wall where she had framed her emergency passport alongside the torn pieces of the original one. It was a strange keepsake, but an important reminder. Not of what had been taken from her, but of what she had found within herself, a voice stronger than she had ever imagined, and the courage to use it.